Welcome to the Hard Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, everybody. I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard Won Wisdom Podcast. Today, we have the third member of our trio. We've had her before. We're going to have her again. We love when psychotherapists and adjunct professor of grad students at the University of Phoenix come on, and it's Kimberly Mahr time.
Yay, Kimberly is in the house.
Yes.
So happy to be here.
Yeah, we love when you're here, and it's like we get free therapy. That's why we invite you.
But Lord knows we need it.
Yeah, and she had this idea for a topic that is so good and it's going to be so relevant for everybody. The issue today is self-abandonment. And that we started talking about that because we were talking about your personal life. So tell me a little about what brought you to this topic and why this is as critical as I think it is for almost every person listening.
Right. Well, I kind of had to take a look at different experiences in my life, themes, relationships, primarily relationships. And I noticed that there was a disconnect or dis-ease or unease, and things just weren't feeling like they were in alignment with me. So in working with a therapist, which we should all probably do if we have the means or the access, my therapist pointed out to me that I had some self-abandonment going on. And I was like, what the heck does that even mean? Right? Like, I am not how can you self-abandon? I'm with myself all the time, right? I'm present. I know myself. But she got to explaining what self-abandonment was. And I was like, holy crap, that shows up in a lot of areas of my life. Right? So to me, I kind of did a little research, and what self-abandonment is basically hiding or denying or diminishing or discounting aspects of self, needs of self, and feelings, putting other people's opinions, feelings, and needs ahead of ours, basically like putting ourselves at a lower priority, and also maybe even not living in alignment with our core values. So that's what self-abandonment means. And I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to, especially women.
And I think off the charts, people can relate to it, right? Especially right now with all of this kind of uncertainty going on in the world and career. And I mean, everything from politics to religion to career to all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's there. And it's really an interesting thing because I don't think any of us consciously sets out to abandon ourselves, right? Or to do this. But what we know in the field of psychology is that self-abandonment usually begins in childhood. Okay. It's a learned behavior. It isn't core to us, which is the good news, which means that we can learn a different way of doing things, right? And it's a way that we often learned to cope and exist and keep ourselves safe and meet our needs in dysfunctional family dynamics. So, children, when we're growing up, we need adults in our lives to keep us safe and meet our emotional and physical needs, right? We can't do that for ourselves. So if you grow up living in a less than ideal family situation or home situation, an unpredictable home life maybe, or chaotic, or dare I say even neglectful or abusive, or even a family where maybe there's addictions. Children learn kind of unconsciously how to hide themselves and become chameleons, morphing into whatever the adults might need to kind of keep the peace, because that ensures the child's safety, right? So the child learns kind of unconsciously to suppress their own feelings and needs. And we also learn that our worth and value is connected to what we can accomplish or do, which I think resonates with a lot of us in our adults' lives.
Well, I know, like, sorry, I'm just kind of like, this brings up a lot of stuff. So I know, like I've shared on here before, like I grew up, right, an alcoholic, unpredictable, volatile, and it's like a household, and you would walk in and you're like, let me read the room. Let me figure out, how can I show up? Do I take the back route, or can I walk through the house? Do I say something? Do I not say something? Like, how do I need to play this to feel like I'm not only protecting myself, but also the sense of responsibility of keeping the peace in the house? Like I could control, believing that I could control someone else's actions, feelings, behaviors. And in many ways that serves me well, but in many ways that is like baggage that holds me back from the good stuff. And so just what you said resonates a lot, because I see it showing up in my life all the time.
Yeah. And it's hard because, again, it's not a conscious or chosen pattern that we chose, but it does come forward, and we carry that pattern forward into our adult lives, and it shows up in our relationships. So if you have grown accustomed to being a chameleon and putting your needs on the back burner and pleasing and making sure everybody else is okay, that's probably what you're going to do in your adult relationships, both your romantic relationships and your friendly relationships, and in your career. So it gets really sticky if we don't start to kind of observe what's going on and look for the markers and then make decisions to change.
Do you think people with like high EQ, is that like when you meet somebody who has a really high EQ, so emotional quotient, we talk about this, leaders that are able to connect on a deeper level, is that sometimes a sign of a flag of maybe their past, or maybe being this type of person? Do you think there's any connection there? Just
there could be, because emotional intelligence, it has its bright side, and then it has its shadow side. And so for some of us, we develop what I would call codependency. Have you heard, like people always say they wear the badge of honor, like I'm an empath. I can read the room. Like I feel other people's emotions, right? Which some people might interpret as emotional intelligence, but actually that's a spidey sense that usually is developed in childhood to stay safe. And at its core, it's just codependency. It's poor emotional boundaries, or diffuse emotional boundaries, and also kind of lower, it can be an indicator of almost low ego strength or low esteem.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think that you can go into an arena and really be an empath and understand people on that deep level. But I think if you were raised with better boundaries, I don't think that comes to play, because I know I'm pretty good at going in there and connecting and reading and doing all of that. But and listening to what y'all are talking about, I think my mom specifically raised me to not do that. And then when I got married, I did it a little bit. I did it for a while, and we started to have trouble. And, my issue in relationships is frequently I'm a little more active than the other person, and I don't stop. And I would wind up with people who were kind of couch potatoes. And when I went to therapy for that, the therapist said, you have to do what you need to do for you at the risk of your relationship, which was this amazing awakening for me, because it meant that sometimes you risk the relationship in order to not self-abandon. So I haven't had a history of that, but I think, in terms of being empath, I think you can be a good empath and still not get sucked in if you've been taught to have good boundaries.
And I think there's a difference, right? So if you're an empath that's just able to kind of read other people's emotions, that could be high into emotional intelligence. But if you're the kind of empath that feels other people's emotions,
it absorbs it. I get you.
Right. So I see a lot of people who are like, I'm an empath. I feel other people's feelings. And I'm like, that is some codependency. That's diffuse emotional boundaries. And that's perhaps what we're talking about here. That's the dark side of it. Right. So it really, you're right. It's all about the boundaries and what we learn and how we learn to manage mostly those emotional internal boundaries, right? And also our esteem and how able we are and how we choose to walk through lives in alignment with our values. A lot of people don't even know what their values are, right?
It's that like feeling in the gut, right? You kind of know, you may not be able to put words to it, but something goes off inside, right? Whenever you're out of alignment.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
it does.
And
you know, there's a bunch of examples I can give you of some different kind of behavior patterns that may be indicative of falling into a pattern of self-abandonment. One of them is just not trusting your instincts, right? Second guessing yourself, overthinking, ruminating, or letting others make decisions for you, just kind of assuming they must know more than you, right? I mean, I've been guilty of this, and I know a lot of people who do this, right? Second guessing ourselves, not trusting ourselves and our instincts. And I think, you know, as we mature, I know for me, this has gotten a lot better. I've gotten much better at this, but as a younger woman, especially in the professional realm, I did second guess myself. I certainly couldn't have known what was right or good, right? I couldn't have known that because I was young, when actually I probably did have a pretty good instinct, right?
Women do this more than men though, right?
The studies are showing that a lot of women, this is really hard for women, especially because in the workplace, especially, women are subjected to some things that men aren't. So like there's workplace stressors like microaggressions, discrimination.
mansplaining. They want to, you know.
Yeah, where they put you at less than, right?
Yeah.
There's gender-based discrimination, there's tokenism, and all of these things can kind of reinforce that feeling of inadequacy or self-criticism, or that I don't know, right?
But back to the point you made earlier about how you're raised, like depending on generational, right? I think now younger women, they're raised believing that they have more options and opportunity and they're capable of accessing more things. I know, if I think about my generation, when you were talking about, you know, what was available, what did you aspire to do? It was low income, gender-based roles. No, you know, and I know, Fawn, you were in a different situation, you know, you were encouraged to go bigger than that, but I know from where I grew up, no.
Yeah.
So you didn't even picture it.
Right.
And you just were naturally falling into that role. So why not stay there when you enter the workplace?
Right. Right. The other thing, some of the other markers that maybe we could look for that might indicate there could be some self-abandonment is people pleasing, where we seek validation from others, you know, needing others to say that we're, you know, get the atta-girl or the atta-boy, and it's not good enough unless it's recognized by other people, and doing things to smooth out things. And so other people validate us, right? So people pleasing is a strong indicator of some self-abandonment.
Well, we all like recognition. So how do you kind of distinguish between like a little bit of ego recognition or gratitude versus what you're talking about here is a self-abandonment?
So I think that, you know, a little recognition for when you've done a good thing or a cool thing. Yeah, like it's normal and healthy to want that. But when you're like, your intent of doing things is to receive that, right? It's, I think, the intention. If I'm just doing cool things because it makes me excited and it fulfills me to do cool things, that's different. But if I'm doing things to win your approval, that's the people pleasing, to be included, to be recognized, to be accepted, you know, to be part of the club, right? That's pleasing. So it's a little bit of a small difference, maybe. Some of the other markers that might indicate is hiding parts of self. So what that would be like putting your own interests or goals on the back burner, and or not sharing your feelings. You know, you might have a strong feeling, like, for example, in the workplace, you might have a strong instinct, you might have a knowing, you might have an important thing to weigh in, but sitting on that and hiding that can be a form of self-abandonment. Some other things that I think are really interesting, and I know this is something that I've battled with my whole life, is perfectionism.
A lot of women, a lot of high achieving, successful women, this is a real struggle.
Right.
Until it's perfect, it's never good enough. Ever.
And it's never going to be perfect,
Ever.
right?
And it's like the biggest time suck on earth.
Yeah. And so, basically setting the bar to something that's unattainable. So you're going to always be climbing, always be, scrapping to get to the thing, whatever it is. And then de facto, you don't feel worthy ever. Right. So that's a form of self-abandonment as well. No matter how much you do or accomplishment, it's never enough. Coupled with that could be self-criticism and judgment. So saying hurtful or mean things to yourself when you don't meet those high, ridiculous perfectionist standards, right? That could be a form of self-abandonment. And also not honoring your needs, not recognizing that your needs are real and valid and important and an important part of the question. This is a big thing I find in especially in moms, women who have families. They subjugate their own needs almost to extreme often for the needs of the children and the family, right? Everything I need that's important to me, that defines me, we got to put that on the back burner because we've made a decision to parent, whatever that looks like.
Or it doesn't get done if they don't.
Yes.
Right.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who very successful executive, makes amazing money, had a husband who had not worked for a decade without a good excuse.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, she's like, I have enough. I'm going to leave. And she was trying to figure out how she was going to leave because she had kids and, they had this beautiful home, and she decided she was going to borrow her sister's fifth wheel and move herself and the kids into the fifth wheel, so little Lord Fauntleroy could keep the house. And I'm like, wait, you're moving in the trailer and he gets the house? And there was just this look, because it hadn't even occurred to her to put herself first like that. And it's like, so I tell this story because it is such a great example that it's a battle that's fought even among the most successful people around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can share my own experience was as a younger woman, I had always been very entrepreneurial, had my own businesses, traveled, had a very rich and fulfilling career life that was really important to me. It excited me, it invigorated me, it made me stoked to get up and do life every day. And when I got pregnant with my first child, we made a decision that I would sell my business and be an at-home mom. Now, nothing wrong with that. I was really excited and grateful to have that opportunity to really nurture and spend that great time with my child. But what turned out is, into it, a couple of years, I was slowly dying inside because while I love my child, my children, and it was an honor and a privilege to do all that and be there, I wouldn't have traded it for the world. I had to self-abandon. I had to put what I knew was core to me on the back burner. It became low priority to no priority. And I noticed myself dying inside. And that's another one of the problems with self-abandonment is there's a distinct connection between a pattern of self-abandonment and a lot of mental health issues like depression and anxiety, right? When we constantly self-abandon, we don't matter, we're not as important, put our needs and wants on the back burner, self-care falls to the suppressing feelings, that can cause some of the features that we see like in depression.
Well, I'm just curious what happened with all of those generations of women really up to the 1970s when they had the famous click of recognition that, oh, wait, we matter. So like our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, they weren't even afforded the luxury of low self-esteem. It just was what it was going to be. So how did they cope with it? And were they miserable, or was there a way that they dealt with it so that they were happy within those confines?
Well, they were neurotic, right? They were histrionic, right? And that was what the mental health professional labeled them. The men would say, "Oh, she's hysterical," right? But what I do know is there was a higher prevalence of smoking and drinking at home, you know, and
pills, Valiant, like all of that.
Yep, popping it like candy, and that's not
Wait a
talked
minute.
about.
Okay, but that I'm going to give you that as being those mothers in the 1960s and 50s. Okay, because they're starting to wake up, right?
Mhm.
What about the ones before that?
Well, and the ones before that,
Like the
again,
Waltons,
right. So maybe the difference is now we have the opportunity to have more robust values and to live in accordance with those values. Back then, let's say 100 years ago or longer, the values were probably different. So hearth and home, raising a family, that maybe was a value for those people more than us. We have more options, right? I don't know. So maybe that's it. I'm not one of them, but I was talking recently to someone who's in her early 80s, and she's just a really amazing woman. She's lived a really rich and amazing life. I mean, world traveler in politics, business. And she was sharing with me, like in her first marriage with her young children, how while she was grateful to have kids and to stay home and do that, she was dying inside because she had to abdicate all the things that were important and meaningful for her and put the family and the children and the spouse and all that ahead of her own wants and needs. And so, I mean, I think it's probably been happening. It just hasn't been talked about.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I even think about my mom, right? My mom was born in the early 1930s. And, she was like, my dream was I wanted to go to college. Like, I wanted to go to college. It was never an option. It was only for her brother. And so she had a twin sister who was valedictorian of the class, but all the twin sister wanted to do was get married. The brother was a couple of years older. He was the only one that was permitted, and I'm going to say permitted, to go to college. And then it was interesting because she ended up getting married, had 3 kids. Her husband was killed on the job. And so she had 3, single mom now, widower, with 3 kids under 6. And she gets a job and she gets enough money to buy her first car. Her car. Her dad takes it from her. Like, yes. And that was just feeling like you just didn't have choice, right? You didn't have agency. Here you are trying to lift yourself up and be self-sufficient, because my mom is a strong, determined woman and, has raised us all this way. However, she was just always held back by a force that was bigger and stronger than her. So back to self-abandonment, but also back to the generational, what lessons are you taught? How are you raised? And I mean, that's not long ago.
Right. And that's a whole thing. Don't get me started on it. I mean, this is kind of what intersectional feminism is going after, right? Is the societal norms, the patriarchal norms, the cultural norms, where even, not just women, but other classes of people, other cultural groups of people, ethnic groups of people are not afforded the opportunity to be self-realized, right? They're pushed down into this box and limited that way, just like your mom was in that case, by societal constructs. And so that's part of what we're railing against now, right? Is rewriting the rules so that all peoples, not just women, but all peoples can self-actualize and have the opportunities to live in accordance with their values and their true self.
Well, and it's hard because, I for all of us, right? We were raised, I was raised in that environment. And even though she wanted more, we were raised a certain way. And I look at now, I think, well, what kind of lesson am I teaching my kids? Or what kind of lesson, what role model?
Right.
There's this kind of straddling all the sides, right? Because on one hand, we try to be superwoman have the great career, have the family, have it all, do all the things, be the, whatever, PTA, like whatever the things are, trying to prove that you can do all of the things, killing yourself on the other end. You have your kids coming up now. These younger girls are like, hell no, I'm not doing that. They're starting to build relationships that have more shared responsibilities. I see that a lot more. They're waiting longer to have kids, and they have some resentment toward the example we've set. It's just kind of interesting that I see so many ways that I encourage younger women to do something different than I did. However, I still live trying to straddle both sides. And I say me, but I mean, I can talk about the peers, the other women I know, they're doing the same thing. It's just, we're in an interesting generation that,
right.
What part are you hanging on to the past while you're fighting it, while you're fighting back with the past? And it's complicated and confusing. And we just are, it's a struggle to figure out how to navigate through it successfully.
Right. And I think that's a cultural evolution thing. Like, so our mothers didn't have some of the opportunities available to them that we have. And then we got those opportunities. And so we overcorrected real hard, and we chased those opportunities and did the at-home stuff. Right. And now I think what you're saying, like the younger generations, like my daughters, they're like, no way, man. But what I love about that is that they also understand that rest and self-care are absolutely imperative. And again, I know that I self-abandoned and didn't give myself rest.
Mm-hmm.
And
do they see that rest and self-care are important for you? Like, do they say, Mom, you've got to, or is it just for them?
They're very encouraging when I do take it. And again, I've become, because I've done some work on this, I am more intentional in taking that. And I've made that visible to them, seeing me take care of myself, seeing me rest when I'm tired. There's a great gal on Instagram. I think her handle is the Nap Ministry. And she has a great book. She's a woman of color, called Rest is a Revolution. I think that's the name. Phenomenal book on how rest, and specifically women and women of color, taking it is revolutionary. And that's how we're going to change things. So again, the goal here is to shift so that an entire society stops self-abandoning. And I'm really just focusing on women here because that's my experience and that's what we talk about here. But I think it's really fascinating. It's starting to correct, and I love it.
Yeah. So love it. What would be your guides for women and men? Anybody who's got an issue with self-abandoning, what do they do in order to stop?
Okay, that's a great question. And I have two questions that, if you've got a pen, write these down. So these are the questions you can ask yourself. All right. So the first question is, what is the reason I'm making this decision? So if the answer involves shame or guilt or fear or like timidity or any kind of a generally negative emotion, like a not negative emotion, but like an uncomfortable or vulnerable emotion.
Loyalty.
Well, if it has like a yes, if it's just
yes,
it's sticky,
yes, right? Michelle.
I'm like having that question. I'm like, ooh, wait a second. Okay.
Yeah.
For those at home, Michelle's got an issue right now, but that's a whole episode in the future
right now. So I gotta take all these lessons. Okay, keep going.
So it basically, if the answer to that question, what is the reason I'm making this decision? Like in your example that you just kind of brought up, I'm making it for someone else, loyalty. I'm making it to sustain or grow a relationship. It may not be what I would do if I was in a bubble, which leads me to the second question. So the first one is, what is the reason I'm making this decision? And if it has an emotionally charged answer, then you need to look at that. It may be you're in abandonment mode. The second question is, if I were the only person on earth, would I still want to do whatever it is? Okay. So that removes the influence of other people from your decision-making. And it allows you to kind of drop into what you're actually feeling about it. So like the loyalty question, if I lived in a bubble and I was the only person here, would I still make that choice?
So that pretty much makes the next action pretty black and white. I mean, just those are two phenomenal questions.
You're welcome.
Oh, no.
Completely remove.
For those of you at home, Michelle is now going to have to give you a 2-sentence summary of what we've been talking about behind the scenes for a few weeks now.
I said yes to help a friend in a situation that I absolutely love them, but regret because I'm miserable.
It's not in alignment, right?
It's not in alignment at all. And
You
it
are
is
off your
green in my
path.
tank. And it is everything I say, help people not to do. So yeah, that's
how it happens. We make decisions to please other people, or what we perceive would please other people, or because it's what's right or what's expected. And it's not in alignment with who are us. So like, think about how many people stay in relationships too damn long because they don't want to hurt people. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to.
We all do that.
You know what I said? Nothing like an uncomfortable conversation takes 3 to 15 minutes, and people will stay in a bad relationship forever. All right, but here's the flip on that, which I want to know, because I really don't have an issue with this. Right?
No, you're one of the people that does.
I know, that's why you're so quiet on this podcast.
I know. So here's what I want to know. Does that mean I am self-involved or selfish? And I ask this because people who are going to set boundaries now are going to say, "Ooh, am I selfish to take care of myself?" I don't think so.
Absolutely not. I think so. There's two terms that sound like they're the same, but they're not. So there's a term called ego, which we kind of, when we use it in pop culture, it feels like a bad thing, right? Ooh, you don't want to have a big ego, right? But there's another term called ego strength. And that is, I know who I am. I am very solid in who I am. I have a fair amount or good ego strength. So I know, and I'm going to assert boundaries, healthy boundaries for myself, because I know myself and I can advocate for myself like a boss. That's you, Fawn.
Absolutely.
And boundary setting we've talked about this before, but boundary setting isn't done to hurt someone else or control someone else. It's literally a roadmap teaching other people how to be in relationship with you. It's here. I'm giving you the cheat sheet on how to be in a successful relationship with me. Here's what I'm willing to receive and I'm not. Here's the cheat sheet, right? Like, you can choose what you want to do, but your choices will determine how much I'm in this relationship, right? So I don't think it's self-centered at all. I mean, obviously you could be a dick about it in the way you say it. I don't think you probably usually are. So I think it's in the delivery, right?
You know, I was 17 years old and I was a reporter for the local paper and got sent to cover Gloria Steinem.
Ugh.
And I will never forget her giving these women at this huge auditorium advice on, for our younger people, Gloria Steinem's a big deal. Okay. No, she gave advice to all of these women who were just starting to have their awakening. And she goes, you have to just do something to start how this works, even if it means saying, pick it up yourself. And I think in a larger sense, that's a lot of what people have to do when they self-abandon. It's like, okay, I'm going to let you take care of this. I'm going to let you worry about this.
Yeah, it's owning, taking back your place and putting yourself as the priority in all areas emotionally. And again, it doesn't mean from a selfish standpoint. Like, so if you're a mom with little kids, it doesn't mean you ignore the children. That's not what that means. It's you find some balance. You ask for time and rest from your partner or the children's, other parent, or help people, support systems, right? You intentionally ask for and create time to also nurture and feed this person, right? It's not just, martyring yourself.
Michelle, I want you to say it again. I want you to say this again, because it was like, I thought it was a very powerful point. Just, how did you put it? You say, I'm not doing this. Like, that's how you start. Pick it up yourself. That's what it was. Like, you just start. And
yeah, it's just
this example to start is pick it up yourself.
Okay, this is your problem. I'm not going to worry about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I mean, I'm thinking a lot. I mean, there have been some relationships where I did take on a little bit, but it was always in the back of my head. Why am I doing this? It's not right. And so, but more than me talking about it, Michelle, I'm really curious for you, because I know that this probably has hit you on a lot of levels. So how are you processing this?
Well, so I think I'm giving myself some credit in terms of how much of this I have stopped doing. Like in the last year or so, like I see significant change in my ability to start building those boundaries. Am I where I want to be? No. So I think I'm having a moment where I feel some grace and like I'm proud of myself for what I'm doing. I also am looking at this and it's like I can see a path forward in terms of some bigger decisions that I've been holding out on, that it's just that I just need to pick it up yourself. I need to do a little bit of pick it up yourself and quit overthinking it and overanalyzing and waiting for like the perfect moment. Back to Kimberly, what you're talking about. Like right now is not a good time because there's these 3 things. When these 3 things are done, then it'll be time. Well,
Right.
it's going to be another 3 things. So it's
things.
it's all BS, right? It just comes down to just do it. Just do it. So that's what I'm over here. I'm kind of laughing at myself because I'm like, at what point am I sick to death of this feeling that I've been having here in the recent past?
And you can
for
feel
those
it
of you at home. Well, I'll say I had a similar situation to what Michelle is doing. I took a job once and a friend said, if you don't like it, you can quit. So I took it and then I quit.
But Yvonne, you're just a little quicker on the uptake.
No, she wasn't quick. She freaking took forever to walk away.
No, that's the one which I took for the insurance and other purposes.
Okay.
This is 2 decades ago.
Okay.
And no, it was to be an editor at the alternative paper in Tampa. And my book had just come out, but I thought, well, I'll get insurance. I thought, I'll do all this. And it sucked. And then I've told Michelle this. I went and I gave a speech to the Rotary in St. Pete. It was a bunch of, old men. And I sold them $1,200 worth of books. And I thought, I can do this. So I went into the office and at 7 weeks, I quit. And she and I are very good friends. I did not realize that my doing that got her into trouble. But she shouldn't have told me I could quit. And the thing is, we can quit. You can quit a relationship. You can quit a job. It's how much suffering are you going to endure before you take your power?
Yeah. Right. And I don't think that long-term grinding gears and doing something that's not in alignment with your core and, self-abandoning, it's never going to be a good thing for you. And it's also not really helping the greater community, family, coworkers, colleagues. It's not helping anybody when we're living out of alignment and we're self-abandoning. So it's just, sometimes you just got to take that leap. And yes.
Is that true? If you're like putting yourself last and taking care of all the garbage at home and nobody else has to take any responsibility, it just makes the life a lot easier for them. Right?
Yeah, but I mean, is there core connection? If I'm in relationship with you and I'm self-abandoning, so your life is nice and cushy and I'm secretly dying inside, don't you imagine that energetically that is felt on some level?
If you're in a relationship with a woman, but if you're with a man, that may be another.
You may be onto something.
But no, it shows that because you don't have sex. Then they're like feeling neglected because as women, what do? We withhold. We are resentful. We'll withhold intimacy. We'll be passive. And we do all these tricks. So yeah, they feel it. They just may not understand
if A, then B.
Why and what's going on.
Yeah. But on the flip side of that, like women also self-abandon by giving and being in intimacy when they don't want to because of, the societal expectations and wanting to not rock the boat. Again, back to those needs meeting when they were children. They learn to please others, subjugate their own truth, their own needs and wants are not as important. We got to do it because it's what will keep everything safe. And a lot of, I don't mean to gender this, but a lot of women, that's why women stay in relationships because it's not safe to leave, maybe financially, with housing or with childcare. It's just not safe. So they self-abandon a part of them is slowly dying inside, pushing it down. And again, it festers. It does fester, and it will gnaw away at your soul.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
You're like, enough. Put on your shoes and deal with it.
Yeah. And I think I notice a lot of women, as we kind of approach this juncture in our lives where we're kind of perimenopausal, menopausal, when we get to this change, we kind of shift into a new season of life. And if you ever do the Jungian archetypes, it's really fascinating. We have the maiden, the mother, and then the crone. So if you are menopausal, postmenopausal, you have entered the crone area, which is where we as women start to not give a shit anymore.
No kidding.
Meeting approval. And we do
gets better.
Right. And it rocks the boat, boy. When we finally say, no, I'm not self-abandoning anymore. Everybody that was used to us doing that and taking advantage of us goes, oh, holy heck, what's going on here? I don't like this. She's being a bitch. When
actually, think about it, that's all we do is like, I have to go out with this person because it's a networking thing. Or it's like, you hit 50 and it's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
I don't think so.
This past weekend, I had, every year I do an annual girls trip with my childhood friends. So there's 6 of us. So we were off for the weekend. Well, of course, we're all now in our, everybody's in their 50s. And it was hilarious because the number of times, one of my friends particularly, the number of times she would say, F it, I'm 50 years old. And you know what? I'm just doing this shit. Like, so it was hilarious that whether we were talking, like every topic was this, like, I'm over that now. I'm doing this instead. It was just a beautiful thing to observe because every single person there was saying and doing that. And you saw it show up. And a couple of years ago, no, it wouldn't have been that way at all.
Yeah.
So for those of you at home who are listening, I hope this wakes you up a little because it's powerful. This has really been a powerful moment to hear you talking about that.
Yeah. And I have, if you're interested in maybe kind of uncovering or exploring or starting to identify areas in your life where you maybe have been self-abandoning a little bit, I have a 20 question questionnaire that you can go through and just kind of read and kind of self-score yourself and go, oh, maybe I do have a little bit of that going on. And then if you do identify that, I'm sure there's lots of great self-help books out there, but I always encourage people to find a great mental health, a practitioner, a social worker, a therapist, a counselor, someone that can help do that walk with you and help you unpack that and then reframe it. The good news here is neuroplasticity is available to us until the day we die. We can change even patterns that we've lived with for 50, 60 years. We can change it. It takes some intentional work. It takes identifying what's going on and then being really consistent with creating the new neural networks, but we can change this pattern. You're not doomed to self-abandon, right? So if you want to change, it is available.
And I do want to say that I have sent people to you. And so don't assume just because she's on our very important podcast that she's unavailable. She's a awesome, great freaking therapist.
Yes.
And so how do they reach you?
So I am licensed to practice therapy in Arizona and Florida, but I am available to do coaching, not therapy, internationally via Zoom, basically telehealth. My website is bestdamnyou.com, which I think is in alignment with what we're talking about here, bestdamnyou.com. And I will provide a link in the show notes if you want to download this free little questionnaire and maybe start exploring what does self-abandonment maybe look like in your life. It's a good starting place.
Well, thanks for being with us. We're so glad you're going to come back on this season, and we love you. So
yes, thanks for having me. I love doing this. It's so much fun for me. So thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you for joining the Hard Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.